Pressed about this notion, Jürgen said that he had read about it in a magazine. However, during the trial, he once again alluded to candlelight and married couples. His parents insisted that he had his own room from the start. However, when Jürgen was asked to elaborate, it was discovered that for the first 5 or 6 years, he was actually sharing his parents' bedroom, maybe even their bed with them. Although he said he couldn't remember ever seeing his parents having sex, or as he called it, the primal scene, a psychoanalyst said that it was very likely he had repressed any memories of something like that. Jürgen said of life in his parents' house that there was hardly a day without shouting, mostly about money. Little H and Jürgen entered the air raid shelter together with their candle. Inside, Jürgen threatened H, but he didn't go any further. He later recalled that while he was threatening the boy, his pulse was racing and his knees were shaking and he felt like he might faint. It meant that little H was able to escape to safety. However, he also never told anyone about the experience, not even his parents. The next victim was T. There's not a lot of information about T. We don't know how old he was or where Jürgen found him. Jürgen had lured T into the forest and tried to attack him. However, T was much stronger than Jürgen had believed, and he had to give up on his plan. T told his mother, who showed up at the Bartsch butcher shop, and complained to Mrs. Bartsch about the incident. Jürgen's mother begged her to stay quiet and not to go to the police, saying something along the lines of, "We've already had enough problems with this child," and with that she paid T 20 marks from Jürgen's pocket money. 20 Deutschmark in 1961 is the equivalent of $123 in 2022. Around September or October 1960, Jürgen's first sexual encounter up to ejaculation was with his friend that he'd made from school. He lived in the same village as Jürgen and his parents. Detlef's parents and Jürgen's were friends. Detlef Düren, a loner just like Jürgen, had started at Marienhausen a little after him. One day, Jürgen found him crying in the corner and asked where he came from. Detlef explained that he was homesick, where he was from, and the friendship between the two developed from there. The pair remained friends until around the 7th grade. Jürgen and Detlef were close, but Jürgen had no idea how to handle personal relationships and would become furious and jealous if Detlef would so much as look at or speak to another boy. By his own admission, they were on again, off again almost daily. When they broke up for good, Jürgen prayed in church that they would get back together. The pair had even run away from the Marienhausen school together. While away, Jürgen tried to push Detlef in front of an oncoming train. Detlef was so angry with him for a while after, but they did sleep together in a trailer in Gewarshausen. Jürgen tried to initiate sexual contact with Detlef on 2 occasions, but nothing had happened. On the night before they were returned home, the pair slept in a barracks. Jürgen stayed awake while Detlef had gone to sleep. He tried to unbutton Detlef's trousers, but he stirred and growled and then turned over, so nothing happened. Later, though, Detlef allowed Jürgen to masturbate him to climax, but when they finished, he threatened to tell Mr. Bartsch unless Jürgen paid him, which he did. This was the start of a twice-weekly payday for Detlef. The sexual adventures between the two involved partial strangulation by Jürgen. At one time, Jürgen confided in Detlef that he would enjoy doing something similar with a younger boy between 8 and 13 years old. He asked if Detlef would join in on the adventure, offering to pay him 300 Deutschmarks, which is around $773, to help him. The pair had gone out together on about 6 or 7 different occasions, but they were completely unsuccessful. It was during this time that Jürgen appeared to be struggling with his homosexuality and had made several attempts to push himself toward being a heterosexual. He sought out prostitutes in Essen, making around 12 visits at different times, and even had a friend who was good at drawing make him pictures of naked females to accentuate their feminine features, seeing if this would change his urges. Later, he said that the discomfort he felt was the same as if a straight person had ever tried to have a homosexual encounter. He also attempted to pursue a relationship with a female neighbor, Heidi. He had liked her quite a bit, but it was no good. Heidi was 15 and Jürgen 17 at the time. The pair had kissed and there was heavy petting. Jürgen asked if she wanted to have sex with him in the woods, but Heidi said no, worried about what her mother would say. Jürgen didn't press her, and he later went on to say that he was only doing this out of some feeling of obligation to try and suppress the homosexual feelings that he'd been experiencing. He later said in letters that he was actually repulsed to the point of being sick at the thought of taking off Heidi's underwear. For the second time in his life, Jürgen found another friend, Victor. This was a guy who also lived in the same neighborhood. It was around the time that he started working for Herr Loon as the butcher's apprentice. There was a period of time that the pair were, as Jürgen put it, true friends, meaning that there was no sexual connotations. He wrote in his letters that he was head over heels in love with Victor. He never imagined hurting him. He said that he would have done anything for him. The pair would read Mickey Mouse books together, and Jürgen had a record player which they played the hit Lollipop on ad nauseum, as well as Nana Muscuri and others. After some time, Jürgen offered money to Victor for him to lie down and act dead for half an hour. Victor accepted the payment. Victor was blindfolded with a black scarf, and Jürgen undressed him. They masturbated together, but that was the end of their first experience. Jürgen paid Victor 50 Deutschmarks for the experience. Victor, however, kept coming back, so Jürgen started to offer less money each time. The pair were together around 6 or 7 times before Jürgen's arrest. They would masturbate each other, attempted anal sex, but were unable to finish. They never kissed, and Jürgen said in his trial that even though he'd had relationships that had gone much further, and this one was much closer than one he'd had with Detlef, he'd never been shown any tenderness by anyone during any of his sexual experiences. Rewind to 1961. Jürgen had left school for good. He'd been prowling almost daily looking for a victim to satisfy his sadistic needs. Finally, at just 15 years old, Jürgen also gave in to his fantasies and graduated from merely undressing, touching, beating and frightening young boys to killing. March 31st, 1962. Jürgen pretended that he was a detective in order to gain the trust of Klaus Jung. He was just 8 years old. During his conversation with Klaus, he promised to pay him for completing a mission. Jürgen took him by car to the tunnel of the nearby air raid shelter. He sexually molested and killed Klaus with a pistol by bashing him repeatedly over the head. Later on, he threw the pistol away. He partially buried Klaus's mutilated corpse and left it there to rot. Astonishingly, Jürgen tells of his early adventures when he killed Klaus. He writes, "I would go through the basement door. My room key fit the outer cellar door, but only I knew that. Back then, I didn't have any real clothes on. I only ever went out in my bathrobe, pajamas and slippers, and I kept this stuff on the whole time. I paid great attention not to ruin my clothes, but one time I messed up my slippers from the street, tunnel, ditch, and way back home through the dirt roads. They were so dirty that I secretly cleaned them when I got home in the morning. Once I couldn't clean them properly and my mother noticed, but it was only once. I told her I dropped my flashlight out of the window. It had rained heavily that night, so I told her I got out of bed to get it. It was that easy." Around 100 yards from his parents' home, out of view of the house, there was a large concrete tube intended for use by road construction workers. It lay at the beginning of a dirt track that led to Jürgen's shelter. Jürgen used the concrete tube to hide clothes. On his adventures at night, he would wait for his parents to fall asleep and then sneak out of the house through the basement window in his pajamas. Jürgen would change clothes at the tube and then disappear. Sometimes he would do this with or without his friend Detlef, and later with Victor. At one time, Jürgen had confessed to his boyfriend Victor about his first crime, killing Klaus Jung. He believed that he wanted to commit further murders with someone else because he wasn't able to do it on his own anymore. He said to Victor, "We can kill other boys. When I get home, you'll be waiting for me downstairs. I'll bring a kid, and we can take it to the air raid shelter and kill it." Nothing came of it, though. He did try hard to convince him. There was an incident where Jürgen had thought that maybe he would have to kill Victor after he confessed about that murder. He might have been regretting telling him about the crimes, and in an attempt to prove to Victor that it actually wasn't true, he took him to an air raid shelter. Unfortunately, the body of Jürgen's first victim was buried there. Jürgen took his letter opener in his pocket just in case Victor uncovered the corpse. He didn't want to kill him because of his urges to kill. Jürgen said he would have only done so to protect him from becoming a victim of his urges. Victor ended the relationship between the two, and they didn't speak for 3 years. There's a rather long gap between his first victim and the next. Jürgen said that he thought he would be able to get rid of his persistent desire to kill, but actually it only became stronger. Even though he didn't kill anyone, he was still luring boys to his cave, and he would molest, rape, or attack them in some way. He would threaten them with death if they should tell anyone. He was out every week looking for new victims. In 1965, Jürgen got his driver's license. It wasn't going to be for a long time, though. He'd started to become a heavy drinker. He and his friend Detlef would often drink until they were unconscious. At home, his parents would allow him only to have a glass or two of wine, but in secret, Jürgen was drinking a lot more, and whenever he could. He said later that it was so he could hide from and forget himself. Jürgen would travel to Essen, Velbert, Neviges, Castrop-Rauxel, Bochum, and further. Almost the entire Ruhr region and into the Bergisches Land. It's a low mountain region of western Germany near the Ruhr and along the River Rhine. Think Düsseldorf area. It's 16 minutes from Belgium and around 12 minutes to the Netherlands. He really wanted to go and drive to the fair and find boys there to talk to and try out his detective story on them. There was even a time that he'd considered taking out an advertisement in the newspaper to lure boys to him. On August 7th, 1965, he was in Essen-Holsterhausen when he came across 13-year-old Peter Fuchs. Peter was walking around the village with a package. He'd gotten the wrong train and didn't know where he'd ended up, so he was asking people for directions. However, villagers there were not very helpful. One person directed him to the police station. Jürgen got out of his car and watched Peter following from a distance as he walked to the station. He went to walk in. He had one foot in the door, but must have thought better of it and continued walking. Around 100 meters from the door of the police station, Jürgen spoke to him. Peter had been walking so much that he had an obvious limp. He was tired and hungry, and Jürgen offered to help. He said he would take him where he needed to be. They went back to his car, but Jürgen didn't take him to his destination. He took him directly to his cave. On the way, he stopped in the woods and forced Peter to undress until he was completely naked. Jürgen tied him up, gagged him, and left him lying on the ground in front of the car before picking him up and carrying him into the cave, where he strangled him until he was dead. A couple weeks later, on August 14th, 1965, Jürgen went back to the parish fair in Velbert. The parish fairs were known for attracting homeless, poor folk from around the surrounding villages. Young boys would often be there, but to find one alone still took quite a bit of effort for Jürgen. He walked around and observed the people there and took a ride on the Dodgem cars. Then he approached a young boy who was on his own, Ulrich Karlweiss. He asked him if he wanted to go with him. In his car, Jürgen had orders that needed to be delivered for the butcher shop, but he was unconcerned with them. Jürgen took 12-year-old Ulrich to the ghost train, fed him candy and snacks, and allowed him to ride on several other attractions, including the Dodgem cars. Eventually, Jürgen asked Ulrich if he wanted to come and make some money. He offered to pay him, but Ulrich declined the money, saying, "No, you've already paid so much for me already. I don't want any money from you." He went willingly with Jürgen to the car. On the way, Jürgen tried to give Ulrich the 50-mark note, but the boy continued to refuse, and eventually Jürgen stuffed the note into Ulrich's pocket. Jürgen drove until eventually he stopped on a dirt road somewhere. Jürgen leaned over Ulrich, and the child attempted to escape through the car door. Unfortunately for him, the lock and the door handle had been installed incorrectly, and instead of pushing the lever down, it needed to be pushed up. Ulrich had no way of knowing this, but it meant he couldn't open the door. I knew it, Ulrich screamed, later recounted by Jürgen in his confessions. He was screaming for help, but Jürgen was just too strong for him. He overpowered him and gagged him, forcing him out of the car to make him undress and then tied him up. Ulrich was